Okay, well, on that lovely note, we are going to get started. We are going to get started. So thank you, first of all three of you for being here. And thank you everyone for tuning into this really exciting panel about covering inequality with FOIA and just other traditional investigative reporting tools. My name is Adam Rhodes, but I'm just going to let our incredible panelists introduce themselves. And if you can say your name, your pronouns, and describe, I guess, your experience covering inequality as an investigative journalist. Let's start with you, Sidnee.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sidnee King. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Right now, I'm an investigative reporter at the Better Government Association, and my focus is equity reporting. And that's kind of my day-to-day life, is focusing on inequality.
How about you, Grace?
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Grace. I am a reporter at Injustice Watch, and my coverage area is housing. So I cover housing. Yeah, there's a lot of inequality there. So.
Right, and you, I really appreciate your specific housing beat, Grace, because your definition of housing is really, really broad, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the traditional way that housing is covered in the city.
I mean, housing is pretty integral to everything. So the way we're trying to define the coverage here at Injustice Watch, is a new area of coverage for us. Really, the way I see it, it's fundamental to everything. Without stable housing, you really don't have much stable anything. And so we're really, really interested in looking at housing, insular, but also where it intersects in a bunch of other social justice areas, race, class, sexual orientation, all of these things that sort of the isms that coalesce here in our society. So, yeah.
And Melissa, ending us off very strong, how about you introduce yourself?
I'm Melissa Sanchez. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. And we don't really have beats exactly, but my areas of interest are immigrants and low-wage work. And I think, just inherently, maybe the way that I've tried to do stories comes from a place of the only stories we do are when something is unfair, when something's wrong, when something's not going right. And so I guess that's through a lens of equality or inequality. And a lot of the way that I try to approach the work is to make sure that the folks who I'm writing about have a lot of agency. Because I think with coverage of immigration, there's often this victim type reporting, this romanticizing of experiences. So I try to write about people and giving them as much agency in the process as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to highlight a little bit of Melissa's work. Melissa, you've done really, really incredible reporting, specifically on immigrant youth. I'm thinking about or low-wage working youth. You did the incredible story on the teenage factory workers who were enduring awful conditions. But you also reported on the Afghan youth who were being mistreated in the shelters that they were housed in, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't quite intentional to write about youth, but that's been a lot of my work here at ProPublica.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I mean, it's powerful and important work. And Sidnee, just to circle back to you, before BGA, do you want to talk a little bit about the coronavirus reporting you did for the Washington Post?
Yeah. Before I worked for the BGA in 2020, I was a part of a project where we tracked cases of coronavirus and deaths in nursing homes across the country. And then I kind of focused on a story about the death rates in nursing homes with majority Black and Brown residents. We found out that there was a higher death rate nationwide in those nursing homes. And so it was, an experience reporting on that, but that definitely is where I kind of cut my teeth on learning how to use data to report on equality.
Yeah. And I will be linking all of this work below, so you can definitely read all of the fantastic work these reporters are doing. So I guess just starting off a little simply, what is your process for even, I guess, going to think about a story focusing on inequality, or how does like a project form in your head? Why don't we start with you, Melissa?
I feel like a lot of what I wind up doing, it's like one of two buckets. Either it's stories that come from what I've already done, and then people will reach out to me who are in that universe with like a new, like the new layer of that problem. So a lot of the reporting that we did on the shelters for immigrant kids in Chicago, I mean, it started in 2018 and it's 2022, and I'm still getting tips as recently as like 4 days ago about stuff that's happening in there, and that all develops sometimes into smaller things or bigger things. The other bucket is I feel like it's sort of chance or like my personal life and connections. And I've kind of always aspired to be one of those journalists who like thinks of a big topic and then zeroes in on it. And you know, like spend I you know, I can plan an entire year worth of stories based on that topic, but I feel like I'm just always kind of like running to the next thing based on like something my neighbor down the street told me, or you know, somebody from the story that I'd written about 2 years ago is now in a different situation or was aware of some other issue. And just the story that I was trying to do this year, I might still do this year, but this might be a bigger, more planned out thing. But it also happened really fortuitously. Like I was trying to do the thing that reporters do, like, you know, have a big topic and zero in, find the harm. And instead, and I wasn't that excited about what I was doing. This is last year after I got back from maternity leave, and I was trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do this year. And then I got a random call from an old man, an old retired guy at Michigan State University, where I went to school, who was friends with a former journalism advisor I had like 15 years ago. I don't know, 20 years ago. And he happened to be plugged into this universe around agriculture in Michigan that I knew nothing about. And he started throwing me names and ideas, and I started calling his people, and kind of through all of this random call, I sort of landed on the issue that I'm hoping to spend this year on. So all sorts of ways.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I feel like people, you know, there is just like the idea generation like machine that I think a lot of journalists are taught to be, but then again, like I think the best story ideas just come like completely out of nowhere sometimes. So Sidnee, how do you, I guess, start in your work at the BJA as an equity reporter? How do you start, I guess, like putting a project together, or even go about like, you know, doing the like pre-reporting for a project that you hope to pitch to editors?
Yeah, I definitely am kind of like that big idea reporter, and it can be very frustrating in the beginning stages of a story. But the thing that's kind of interesting about the BJA's work is that everything we do is government focused. So there has to be some sort of government mismanagement or misaction component, which kind of tightens the parameters of a story, which is helpful. But I think a lot of times, like I'm tracking like what's happening in City Hall, what's happening in Springfield, and then kind of taking the perspective of just the people around me, like why this would be important to them. So I kind of like think about my mom, like why would my mom care about the new universal basic income measure that's coming out of the mayor's office, or like why would my grandfather be interested in Invest Southwest or things like that. And I'm really like a narrative reporter, but just really in kind of like a data space. And that helps me a lot in combining and those two worlds and finding a path forward, like in creating a reporting plan.
Yeah, I feel like I love the idea of you thinking about like, why would your mom care? Like, why would like your family members care? Because, you know, I think we're taught so much as like, who is like the average reader? Like, but there is really no average reader. So even just thinking about like, how would this like one person who's like, I guess like judgment and opinion I can like actually hone in on, what would they think about it? So I love that. I'm actually totally going to steal that idea.
Free for everyone.
Okay, so Grace, at Injustice Watch, how are you putting your project, or like how do you think of things to focus on within like, again, the vast beat of that is housing?
Well, no, I'm just kidding. Because housing is really, especially the way we're defining it so broad, you know, I can have a problem sometimes finding, like, you know, that one thing that you want to narrow in and focus on. I lean a lot on my editors, because I mean, they're editors. And I lean a lot on my coworkers as well. My reporting plan, I really try to keep my eyes to the ground, ears to the ground, whatever. Same
Both
difference.
of them. You have to look and listen, okay?
Everything. I try to really do a lot of engagement, community outreach. For me, a really big part of my reporting, maybe it's my praxis or what, but I really, really want my reporting to reflect these communities that I'm talking about. So that is usually my top priority, is understanding how this story is gonna, or what I'm talking about, what's happening in this community, what are they saying, how can I actively convey this in this story, in what I'm writing, and is what's happening here one problem, or is it a symptom of a bunch of other issues that requires further investigation? And so that's really it. I really try to lead with making sure that I am, I guess, really shining a light on the issues that are really like impacting my neighbors, more or less. Yeah.
That makes total sense. I love that. Thank you. So, you know, as investigative journalists, I think sometimes we hope that like the documents and data we get are just like as clear as day. It's like, yes, this is happening. Like I have to do a ton of like work to like find the, like it's complicated to get like the documents that piece the puzzle together. Like in a perfect world, there would be that one file that one person hands us and it was like, oh, it spells everything out. Great. I don't have to make any difficult phone calls or argue with any public affairs officers or anything. But you know, there aren't just like data tables on the Chicago, there aren't tables on the Chicago data portal just being like, yes, here's all of the racist incidents that have happened here. Here's like all of the transphobic incidents that have happened here. So where are, I guess, like your go-to sources when you're trying to find, or like you have a hunch about a story that you go to really, I guess, see if it's a story at all? Let's start with you, Grace. It was a very roundabout answer or question.
I don't know if I have a go-to. I think it really just does depend on the story that I'm working on, or I should say projects that I'm working on at the time. Yeah, but I mean, I always try to, I guess, you obviously start off with research, right? What is it that you need to FOIA? What is it that you need to know? What don't you know? What's not out there? But yeah, I can't say that I have a particular go-to.
That makes a lot of sense. I would say, like, as an example, a big go-to that I've been relying more and more on like police records in my reporting as my focus shifts to like criminal justice. So I'd be interested if Maya, who was the former housing reporter at The Reader, she walked me through how to like go through CHA complaints and stuff like that. So Sidney, are there any like particular documents or just information, like places that you go to look, like any city contracts or stuff like that that you, I guess, kind of always are keeping your eye on?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the city doesn't have like, you know, like data sets on racism online, but I mean, I'm always looking at the City of Chicago data portal, like constantly, just looking for new things. And it's tough because of course, like that data is not, when you have a hunch, like the data is not going to immediately like give you an answer. But I think that that's always the best place to start. And actually, I think something else that I really like to do is go back for like City Hall, like committee meetings and listen to like the public comment sections or just reading through agendas. And stuff like that. And again, like my work is very like government focused. So this might not work for everybody. But that's really helpful to me because again, like I mentioned, I'm a narrative storyteller. So I think a lot of times in the process, I'm trying to find like the color of the story before
Mhm.
I find like the facts and the data and the numbers. And sometimes that's a dangerous process because you find the color, you fall in love with the color, and then you start filing FOIAs, and people are like, "This data doesn't exist," you know. You know, that can be a frustrating component of my reporting process, but you know, that's just how I operate right now.
Wouldn't it be perfect if it was like, okay, this here on the Chicago data portal is just like a list of all the incidents that I'm specifically looking for. Thank you.
Yes.
In a perfect world.
Yeah, let's start a movement to get that going.
Perfect. How about you, Melissa? What are, I guess, your favorite, or I guess like some go-to sources that you look for, or that you look through?
Right. So the type of stories that I like to do, often there are no public records that exist for. There's no data for. The kinds of people that I tend to prefer to write about rarely file complaints. They're not often like on government registries, etc. So it makes it really difficult to quantify sometimes the scope of a problem. So when I wrote about the Guatemalan teens who worked in factories, like child labor, essentially. Um, I mean, one way to document it was by collecting as many by interviewing as many people as possible. So it wasn't just one person's story that there's very few records on. It's 15 people's story, and that kind of that number gives it more weight. And so for some of the stuff on labor, like the Federal Department of Labor has some pretty massive and convoluted data sets online you can download. And they can be helpful. Like there's like wage and hour complaints. There's OSHA, which is like workplace safety information. But it's like you have to go into it knowing that it's limited because very vulnerable people, undocumented people, underage people are not going to be filing complaints about any kind of workplace harm. But that's a place that I go to, or like Pacer for lawsuits, or state courts for lawsuits. The other, but again, but all of it is it's not it's I'm never going to find like a data set that shows me how many like children work in factories, and like so it just relies on a lot of shoe leather reporting, like calling people all over the country, using other ways in like school districts or hospitals or immigration attorneys. But it's never I'm not one of those reporters who's great at getting like, oh, here's a record I got through FOIA that showed this like government wrongdoing. On the other hand, and then there's there's a kind of records that does exist that isn't public, that then I have to get through means that are not public records requests. And so that's the case with like a lot of the shelter reporting. All that stuff is protected by HIPAA. It's like private information about children who are in federal detention, essentially. And the way that I know what the records are at this point because people have leaked us thousands of records over the past few years. So I kind of know what I'm interested in. And if workers reach out to me, or if I encounter people who work in these places, then I might describe the kind of thing that I know might show on paper whatever the allegation is that they're making to me, like, off the record, or on background. So I wish there was like an easier answer, but it's like a lot of building human sources who learn to trust you, and that's because of like the work that you've done in the past, or like looking for other ways to build your own data sets, or prove with quantity that what you're hearing is happening at scale.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes complete sense. That is something we talked about in the panel I was hosting previously about reporting on LGBTQ plus communities. Like, number one, the federal government like just started collecting data about queer people. Number two, queer people are less likely to report discrimination, harassment, like abuse for a myriad reasons, and that goes for every marginalized community. So I think that brings up a really important point, Melissa, that like, a lack of like that perfect data set, or a lack of like easily accessible public records, doesn't mean that these things don't exist, that it just takes, committed, dedicated reporters, like all three of you are, to make these, to bring these stories to light. And so kind of leading into my next question, that really leads in really well. The best stories about inequality, and best end quotes there, the most powerful stories about inequality are the ones that show a pattern of abuse, that show systemic harm, as well as the solutions to that systemic harm. But how have you all pieced together these kinds of stories? You know, Melissa, I think I think you came to a class of mine actually to talk about some of your reporting, and that in the Guatemalan teens in a factory, you used is it EM? It was like EMS records or something like that to like find that these injuries were happening.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the original question?
Yeah, like how have you like? Can you talk about?
Oh,
like,
sure, on the patterns.
Yeah.
So for that one, I have for years been interested in conditions for temp workers in factories across the suburbs. It's a lot of immigrants, a lot of Latino immigrants because they're more easy to exploit. They're easier to underpay, easier to screw over. And I had been following a number of cases for a few years before the pandemic and trying to figure out, like, at one point I really wanted to write about women who were sexually harassed and abused at work. And I couldn't quite nail it down, and other things kept coming up. I was working on a bunch of stories around tickets and debt in Chicago. And but in the process of filing records requests around that, I think there was a particular factory I was interested in where I knew there was a lot of abuse that was taking place against women. I love police records, and police are very problematic, but they keep track of whatever it is that they're doing, and that sometimes is an indicator for broader problems that could be going on. And so there was one factory that I pulled 911 calls, and I wound up getting like ambulance reports from too. And I was hoping to find like woman was like sexually harassed or raped or whatever, and that wasn't there. But there was one incident in the file of a 15-year-old boy who was like, I think he'd fallen and had to get hospitalized at work. And so I asked for more on that specific file, and there was nothing. So I just kind of like noted it in my brain, like, okay, 15-year-old boy was working here. Like, it could just be like one random 15-year-old kid. But my understanding of that particular workplace is it's like nearly all Mexican undocumented immigrants. And I just knew that from personal interactions with folks. And time goes by. There's like some federal cases I'm watching that have to do with labor, and there was two cases involving like children who were working, and I kind of just noted them down. And then like my own personal experience, my family's experience told me that a lot of immigrant children come here to work. And so I kind of had all of this in the back of my brain. Some of it was records, some of it was just personal, some of it was like talking to folks. When the pandemic happened, I kind of thought it would be a really good opportunity to like look at the children who are essential workers in this time. And so it became, I guess that was sort of like the pattern that had been established, never in any kind of like journalism reporting, but just different things you kind of see here and there. And I took like a month or so to really try to like put them all together and see what could be told from that. And that's how I landed on this particular neighborhood and in a particular school with a particular set of teachers who were working with about 80 Guatemalan kids, most of whom worked overnight in factory shifts, and most of whom were still underage.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of that. I remember when you first told me that like you got that story, I was so impressed. So thank you again for saying that. Sidnee, I would love to hear how you kind of pieced together your story about how the death rate in Black and brown majority nursing homes.
Yeah. So basically we were, like I said, in real time, because like this was the middle of 2020. So like the height of the pandemic, tracking like all the death rates and infection rates in nursing homes every day, like this massive spreadsheet, just filling it out every day. And I was a part of a team, so it wasn't just me doing this work. And I think that, just as I was kind of looking at the spreadsheet, I did what I said I do early on, and kind of ask myself, like, why would my, aunt care about this, right? Like, I mean, of course, like the loss of human life, right, is tragic and something that we should all care about. But like from someone else's perspective, what would really be the most important thing to learn? And so we kind of just narrowed it in on some of the states that had higher death rates. And I literally, and this is something that I don't know if like this is just like a obsessive quality that I have, but a lot of times, if I see like 100 examples of something, to find the best one, I will literally like reach out to every single person, every single nursing home, like to figure out which one is the best one, you know, for the story, to tell the story. And so we landed on Georgia. There were, I can't remember how many nursing homes, a bajillion scientifically. And and I called all of, you know, I looked at the stats for all of them. I looked at the nursing homes have like ombudsmen, so they have to file like reports on like the cleanliness and stuff like that, abuse. So I looked at those reports for all of them, and we found a nursing home where everybody basically who lived and worked there was Black, and everybody who lived and worked there basically got sick. So maybe with the exception of one or two people. So, and I think it's really just like that obsessive, like desire to fill in the gap. Like a lot of times it's really frustrating with this type of reporting when something isn't quantifiable, when, you know, when like, you know, that there is an inequality or an injustice, and you can't say, according to records received from the Department of Health, you know, 95% of blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes it takes like talking to a million people, you know, to put that trend together. And I think that that is just as significant and kind of provable as it would be if, you know, we had gotten records or a data set from a government body. So that's kind of how we landed on the nursing home that we focused on. And then from there, the numbers kind of just filled themselves in.
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. So Grace, I am particularly taken by your story about the Stateville prison water crisis. Can you kind of say how you helped tell the story of like that pattern of abuse?
Sorry, it's muted. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, totally. Can you, so with your story about the Stateville prison water crisis, I guess like, how did you, like, what tools did you use to show that it wasn't just like an isolated incident of like water being contaminated, but like a systemic issue facing the system?
Well, right now that, okay, I'll back up. I got a press release. It was a press release for a press conference. Actually, my coworker Carlos sent it my way. And I was like, maybe I should go. Let's just see, right? Go, Carlos. So maybe I should, you know, see what it's about. So I went to the church, and through interviews, I think while I was there at the church before we went to Stateville, I talked to at least like 15 people. And I'm just like, you know, why are you guys doing this? What's going on? Just asking why, like just showing up, being like, what's going on here? Why are you guys filling up this Greyhound bus with thousands of bottles of water to take to a prison, you know, an hour away? Why? What's going on? They don't have water? So just asking the why was enough for me to be like, okay. And we traveled to there, and the water got in, and through the interviews, through talking to people, is where I'm able to see that there's no vendor to distribute water for the DOC right now, that plenty of people inside many different correctional facilities across the state are, how do you say, thirsty, hungry, like they're not getting their basic needs met. And so in this sort of looking through, you file the FOIAs, you know, I file the FOIAs to the DOC asking for, you know, to look at these records to see what's in the water. The people inside, the people incarcerated are saying the water stinks. It's brown. They can't drink it. They don't like showering with it, and they have to, you know, cook their food in it. Like, it's water. It's their home, very much so. If we know that majority of people who are incarcerated are going to get out at some point in time, that is their home, temporarily speaking. If the point of incarceration is to rehabilitate, and the people who are inside don't even have access to clean water, are we really rehabilitating? Are they really going to get, you know, when they're done with their sentence, are they really going to, I don't know, be better people in society if they don't even have water? So these questions are I have to find FOIA, the DOC, the Illinois EPA, the who else? All these different engineering firms to see their different reports, their different schedules. But it's also like these different things are not infallible, right? You can file the FOIA and then they send you a sheet and it's all redacted. And then it's like, okay, or in my case, they fulfill it. And then you find out that, there are 46 facilities and I only have 20 pieces of paper. This is interesting. Where are the other papers? Do they not exist? Are they lost? Are they not digitized? What's going on here? So sometimes I have found, even in filing these requests, I might have more questions than answers. I might have to file more requests to get answers to the other requests. I'm like, this is crazy. But we do it anyway. When they don't respond, then I have to appeal. Then everybody's looking crazy. And you could have just responded. It's especially when you're filing these requests to, I would say like governmental like bodies, they don't want to fulfill them. Like they don't want to. And this is something I'm learning in making FOIAs detailed, but not too detailed, because specific, but not too specific. You don't want to get it unduly burdensome. You don't want all of these things. It's really an art, the art of filing a FOIA. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
No, it completely did. I think first of all, it completely answered the question. But I was also like really fascinated about that specific story because you use public records, but then also you have to rope in like the engineering firms and like the nonprofit who like release their own reports. So like sometimes the like data that's backing up our story is like not from the government, like because they don't want to give it or because it's not there or because they only gave you 20 pieces of paper. Okay, so before we head into the Q&A, we have 15 minutes left for the Q&A. Stories about inequality obviously carry a very intense emotional weight for readers, for reporters, and most importantly, for our subjects. And how do you all make sure that as reporters, you're treating your subjects with care and sensitivity and, not like kind of just extracting stories of their trauma and I guess giving them agency in the process? So I would love to start with you, Melissa.
I'm so glad you asked that because it's something I think every year I think about more. When I was younger, like I made mistakes and I think I've learned from them. I think what I wind up doing is trying to give people every possible opportunity or excuse to not talk to me and kind of to lay out all the risks that I am aware of, all the potential harm that could come, all the examples that I can think of how this has happened in the past, whether if I'm talking with people who are undocumented and might have to do with like their ability to stay in this country, their ability to keep their jobs, etc. I make very clear that my job is not to help them, that I'm not a lawyer, that I cannot give them advice, that I care about their experience, but my job is not to like materially improve their lives, which is really, really hard to say and to like admit because you want to. I mean, we're all human and that's why we do our work. But so it doesn't become like a transactional thing because that's really you don't want to mislead people into talking to you. I'm really transparent about myself, my experience, my background, my personal like connection to whatever the issue is because I ask a lot out of people, and I want them to feel safe, like knowing the same thing about me, and like like it's unfair, I think. But I think like the more like just the clearer you can be about like who you are, what you're trying to do, what the thing is going to look like at the end. Kind of like I keep people informed throughout the process up until the very last minute. The ability to, I mean, like depending on the person, like I will treat like a a government official or like the head of a company different than I will like a 15-year-old boy who just immigrated here a couple of years ago. So I'll treat the child with more care, like the immigrant with more care. and give them more like flexibility to pull themselves out or to pull information out. But I think the more you can kind of walk people along through the process and let them know that they can not participate, that, you know, it's okay, that they have the complete right to do that. I think that gives people a lot more space or ability to make up their own mind and to feel okay about it. Or I'll tell people, like, I just had somebody that wanted to give me a bunch of records that could get them in a lot of trouble, and I kind of walked them through, here's all the things I can imagine that could happen if this ever came out that you were the person. Here's everything I will do in my power to protect you and your name and your you know, your confidentiality. But like, don't send them to me yet. Like, think about it. Talk to somebody about it first, because it's your job. It's your whatever. And so all that stuff is really hard. I always feel like I'm kind of working against myself, and I'm sort of ensuring that that person is like 100% on board. What does that do for like their like emotional well-being? Like, I'm not a therapist, so I have to tell them that too. I'm not your therapist. I feel like our job often is that. Um, I don't. Sometimes I ask people if they. It feels a little bit absurd sometimes to ask people if they talk to a therapist, because usually they're too poor or they don't have the health care. They don't have the capacity to do that. Um, I don't know. When people cry, like I cry. It's not like a fake thing. You think you show your humanity, and that kind of helps people feel a little bit less alone. But I don't know. I do wonder whether I should try to connect people to places if they're dealing with a lot of trauma. But then you also don't want to like change the situation that you're writing about, because then you can't quite write about it the same way. So it's that part's a little bit complicated for me. But I try to like take things very slow with people and not ask them all the big heavy things like right when we meet, and kind of develop like a relationship of trust first.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So Sidney, I guess how do you also kind of work to take care of your sources and treat them with respect? Especially, you know, dealing with like government inequity can be it can be pretty jarring for people to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting reporting on these things, because I think like for a long time, a lot of people have been saying like, we wish we'd see more stories like in this realm, right? And in the past couple of years, it feels like, you know, just like this like social buzzword thing, like and a way to get attention, right? Like for your story or your career or just on you as a journalist, right? If you do a thorough job in exposing some sort of injustice. And I think that like in my short time as a professional reporter, I've had mentors and people around me who I've seen who've been really, really good at getting people to talk to them, right? And have taught me like certain, you know, ways, things to say, you know, tricks to use to get people to open up and talk to them. And I think the first time that I really started to consider this is last summer. I wrote a story. I co-authored a story that focused on young people who are being arrested for carjacking in Chicago. You know, kids as young as 13. And I really had to ask myself, even if, you know, the mom says, oh yeah, it's okay, you know, that you put his name in the story, or, you know, oh yeah, it's okay if you take our photo and tell our story and identify us in this way. And even if that would be like a really great nugget for the story, and it would, you know, like people be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you got this 14-year-old to talk, right? And name themselves. Is it worth their well-being? You know what I'm saying? Like, is the clickbait, is the, you know, career acumen, whatever, is that worth the person's well-being? And I think really being honest with yourself as a reporter about what you're prioritizing when you're putting the story together. You know, do you genuinely care about, you know, seeing, you know, this wrong righted, and is it necessary to put somebody in, you know, potentially harm's way, or just, you know, open up things for them that you don't know what's going to come? Is it necessary, and is it worth it for the story? And I think that I constantly have to ask myself that question, especially dealing with, you know, just like sensitive stories and sensitive communities.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And, you know, I think there are definitely times as a reporter that I've said, like, I don't think that I can protect a source in the way that they need to be protected to talk to me. And I think that's okay. And I think it just means that, like, there just might be somebody else that might have to be the source of certain information and stuff like that. So Grace, just before we have 10 minutes left before we get to the Q&A really quick. Grace, how do you, I guess, make sure that you treat your subjects sensitively and carefully?
I mean, both Melissa and Sidnee said basically all the right things. When you're doing, hard interviews, trauma-based interviews, at least for me, I don't open with that right away. In grad school, my master's project, I interviewed people who had lost loved ones to police violence here in Chicago. And so my first interviews weren't like, so what was your, how did you feel when Riamo showed up and shot Quintonio? Like, I wasn't going to ask Mr. LeGrier that straight off the bat. My first questions were, what was Quintonio's favorite color? What did you guys like to do together? What was a typical Sunday like? What was, sort of asking them to remember, I guess, happy things about the person they've lost before we sort of delve into like the harder topics, like the last time you saw your son was Christmas Day. Like, I don't want to ask you what's Christmas like for you. So I'm going to be sensitive to what they've been through. For me, I really try to really let the people know that I'm talking to, like, really let them know that I care. Sociopolitically right now, journalists don't have such a great reputation. So right off the bat, I'm like, this is not to get, clicks. This is not for likes on Twitter. This is not for all of those things. This is to show that you guys are being evicted for no reason. And personally, I don't think that's okay. So we're going to write about this. That's ultimately what it's about. Similar to what Melissa said, we can't make those promises. We can't promise to help the situation. And I do say that as reporters, we do want to seek the truth, but we also, we're not supposed to do harm. And for me, it's like really making sure that they understand, whoever I'm speaking to understands that this is not just some like, oh yeah, I'm just here writing a little story, especially when I'm writing about housing. Honestly, housing going on. I live in Bronzeville. So these are a lot of my stories lately have dealt with people who are quite literally my neighbors. And I will say that there is a level of, I don't know if it's maybe a personal responsibility or if it's guilt or what, especially when you're reporting on communities that you're a part of, communities that you align with, identify with. It's like, this woman reminds me of my grandma, like, and she's facing all of this. So there's sort of that, we can't be everyone's, I guess we're not their saviors. It's not our jobs, actually. So it's kind of like balancing wanting to be there for your sources, but still not overstepping it. Like, I want to bring Grace into this, not Grace the reporter, but Grace. Like, I want you to feel like you're talking to me, like this is really who I am, but also finding that boundary, like this is who I am, but this is still, professional. And, I don't got it all figured out. We're still here. We're still learning. But so far it's been good. And there are definitely been times when people do trust you and then they might come back and be like, actually, I don't know anymore. And it's not to make them feel bad. It's like, okay, that's cool. Like, it is your world, girl. We're just here. Like, that's fine. And really letting them know, like, there's truly no pressure. And I always say thanks like a bajillion times. I'm pretty sure I annoy them. I'm like, you didn't have to talk to me. So thank you. For real. Like, I really do appreciate it. Anybody who was a journalism student, undergrad, grad, you get it. People don't talk to us, even in the professional world. They don't respond. So I'm like, when you do, Thank you. I really, really just, I think, try to lead with my humanity first. And yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we do have a couple of minutes for Q&A. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. We have one question to start for Melissa. For the story you did about the teen workers, if you were wondering if you use any records from OSHA and if you have any tips for understanding OSHA records or how their investigations into workplaces kind of move forward. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. So I kind of used OSHA records. So I was in a bit of a pickle with that story because I did not name the companies that these kids worked at. And so I knew that by asking for some records that might alert authorities to where the children I was writing about were working, and that might lead to like some sort of investigation or closure at the factory, which they specifically did not want. But what OSHA has online is what's called the establishment search, and just Google like OSHA establishment search. And you can put in the name of the company, like let's say McDonald's in the city, and then look them up, and you can find the individual business, and it will list inspections or kind of like triggering events. And depending on when those events happened or what the outcome was, it might give you like a little abstract of it. If you download that giant data set that I told you about, which is like a pain in the ass, and like you need like a big system to be able to do it. So I use like a Postgres SQL system. Then you can learn a little bit more about some of those incidents. But for that particular story, there were maybe 20 or 25 different factories and temp agencies that I knew of. I ran all of them through that online system and didn't see anything that was substantive. And OSHA is just for like safety. That's not for wage and hour violations. And so I kind of did a similar thing with the wage and hour violations, and I didn't see anything substantive that rose to the level of like considering whether to file a FOIA form. They were like a carpal tunnel. They weren't anything big. But yeah, I think the online establishment search is really helpful. And then if you do see something you're interested in, like the FOIA people at OSHA are not that bad. You can call them and kind of walk. Sometimes they'll just pull it up for you online, like, or on their computers, and help you understand what might be in the file. You might want to ask for like the narrative for the inspection. I think you would ask for like the inspection and the narrative, and those are records that they might give you more quickly. And then if you find that it's like interesting, then you can ask for the entire case file, including maybe like interviews or like the inspector's notes, etc. But that might take a longer time to get, depending on when it happened. They may have to like pull them from some file somewhere in some warehouse, and they're not as easily accessible, partly because of the pandemic. Hopefully that's helpful.
Great, thank you so much for the advice. I personally never gone through OSHA records. It sounds like it sounds like its own beast. I'm still learning how to go through the Cook County criminal court records, so big steps for me. Does anyone else have any other questions? If not, we can totally wrap this up. Oh, super interesting. Thank you, Saba, for this question. What do you want your outlet's leadership to understand about covering inequity, and how do you help your readers understand the need for and potential impact of reporting focus on inequity? How do we start with Melissa?
Sorry, did you say me? It's you. You sound like a robot to me right now.
Oh, no.
Okay, sorry about that. It's a good question. I mean, my particular organization, a lot of our work is like we measure our success based on impact. So we're constantly writing stories when there's impact on the work. So I think that's how we help our readers understand the need for it. I feel like my bosses more or less get it, although it's a pretty white leadership. And so sometimes I wish that there was more people of color in editor roles that could kind of help with the nuances of some of the things that we cover. But I'd be curious to hear what Grace and Sidnee think. You both work for very different organizations with different leadership too.
Yeah, I think, and this might not be the answer that you're looking for, but something that I have been thinking about a lot lately is not only focusing on topics that are about inequity, but also writing it in a way and conveying the information in a way and using language that's also equitable, that it's not like this, you know, sometimes like investigative reporters get into this like writing for other reporters mind space. And I think, you know, an organization like mine, we have like a long history of writing in a certain way for a certain audience. And sometimes in my editing process, that's the one thing that I feel very supported in the topics that I want to cover, but in the way that we're conveying and writing about the stories, I think that's also really, really, really critical, right? Like if I'm writing the story and the only person that can engage with the story is, you know, somebody at the Sun-Times or somebody at the Tribune, it's not really helpful, right? Like we're writing it so that people can equip themselves to, you know, like navigate their lives with the most information possible. And so that's something that I'm hoping to see, you know, kind of evolve and change over time, and something that I'm really committed to. So if my editors are watching, hi.
Fortunately, I am in a a small newsroom, but also a really diverse newsroom. You know, we have everybody, just kidding, but it's a really diverse newsroom. Diverse not just in like race and gender, but diverse in life experiences, diverse in what school you went to, what you did in school, things like that. And I think because we have a lot of different, you know, people, it is to our benefit. You know, there are just things that I see in a story that some of my coworkers don't see, vice versa. And then our non-editorial, our engagement team is actually like amazing, like amazing. And they get it. I mean, it's just, especially because we're a smaller newsroom, a newer newsroom, a younger newsroom. Some of the issues that you find at older newsrooms, legacy newsrooms, we don't really deal with too much. Everyone sort of understands how to we need to bridge the gap between what we're writing, much like Sidnee said, and the messaging they're receiving. And we do brainstorms and talk a lot about what is the best way to tell this story, you know? And I do think because of all the things I said, like it does help our sort of creative flow. So yeah, I do feel really lucky in that aspect.
I guess my answer.
Thank
Hi,
you, Adam, for moderating us.